welcome back. Religion Online. I'm Rabbi Joseph Jasser. Let me also take a moment to say thank you to Mr. Michael Sebili, who is our producer, and Bruce Clayton, who is our screener. 1-800-848-WABC. I just received a text from Alan Abramson, a close friend, and who was scheduled to be here today, but unfortunately under the weather. And one of the things he mentioned is we need a reasonable approach. I know that in law school, I would often hear, as many did, what would a reasonable person do under the circumstances? That has to be the standard. I know many of us think we're reasonable, no matter what the circumstances, but reason has to be attached to facts. And we find there are people who rush, as I said earlier, they rush to make statements, they rush to say things that are not predicated on truth, they're not predicated on information, pure emotion, raw feeling. They send it out as if, they're talking factually. They're not. And that's why it's important to have people on the air who are involved in these causes, who understand in depth the problem. And one of those people is Dr. M. Zuhdi Jasser, who's the president and founder of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, co-founder of the Muslim Reform Movement, former vice chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, host of the podcast Reform This on the Blaze Radio Network, and author of the book A Battle for the Soul of Islam, an American Muslim Patriot's Fight to Save His Faith. Good morning, Dr. Jasser.
Good morning, Rabbi. It's always great to be with you.
Well, it's an honor to have you with us. There was an editorial in the Times this past week, about attacking Islam, and you've made the point many times and very carefully that we have to be very careful when we talk about, political Islam as opposed to, other forms of Islam. There are those who have taken your religion, have perverted it, and made it seem as if all of Islam speaks this way. Talk about political Islam from your vantage point.
Well, basically, it's a political movement. Those are Islamic movements that believe in political parties based in platforms in which they want to put into place an Islamic state based under their interpretation of Sharia. So the entire identity of the state, its legal system, is all based on Sharia law and the clerical interpretations, and the parties are Islamic theological or theocratic parties. So, Saudi Arabia, Iran, those countries may say they're with us against Hezbollah, against ISIS, against Al-Qaeda, but they are both the firefighters and the arsonists because their states are inspired by theocracies. And at the end of the day, that's what there needs to be a third pathway in the Middle East, and we don't talk about that enough, which is the pathway of freedom, liberty, individual rights over tribal sort of theocratic mentalities.
So what you've been saying is that Islam can be reconciled with democracy, that you can be, as you are, you can be a practicing Muslim and a proud member of a democratic society, that there is no conflict between the two.
I certainly believe that. Many Muslims I know believe that. I'm not in denial to understand that most of the establishment of Islam globally is not compatible, but we have a revolution of thought that needs to happen, and the Arab awakening was an opportunity for that unfortunately we've let get filled by the worst actors and the Islamist movements of the world.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I thought to myself yesterday that sometimes when you see the protests, it is very uncomfortable, even if I agree with some of the causes, to stand with some of the protesters, because I don't want to legitimize people who delegitimize me. And you and I have been to various protests over the years, and I have to tell you, some of those protests, you see some of the leaders. You have Madonna recently who says, I have thoughts of burning down the White House and then going into other expletives. We have somebody here in New York who is a flamethrower. I mean, she's a hate monger, and she goes to the front of the line, and she's out there speaking. And you have to make certain choices in life. It's very, very difficult, and I just. So far, I refuse to be part of a demonstration when leaders of the demonstration are people who seek to destroy me in their own fashion. So when we organize demonstrations, we ought to be very selective as to who's speaking. And as you know, and as I know, sometimes the people out there speaking are not the people we want speaking for us.
Oh, amen. I mean, it's, the litmus test should be not only what they're against, but what are they for? What are the principles they're standing for? And unfortunately, they're often just collectivists who want to, group Muslims, group others as victims, as grievance groups, as whatever the complaint may be. But they really, when you look at what they're for, it's not universal human rights. It's not really a clear understanding of what the problems are and what the solutions are in the world.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about what's going on presently. We had, before you're coming on, Shadi Martini, who was a senior Syria advisor of the Multi-Faith Alliance, and he's an American citizen now, former refugee. And he said, look, I went through a vetting process. There is a serious vetting process in place, and we have not had, acts from Syrian refugees that have hurt our country. So as long as there's a vetting process, unlike Europe, where everything's so porous, we need to keep that in place and not have a wholesale ban. What's your position on this?
Well, my position is that he's exactly right. The Syrian refugees have been, unfortunately, scapegoated because there haven't really. I mean, most of them have been, even in Europe, citizens or immigrants. But still, at the end of the day, they're immigrants, most of them, who came. The last one in Europe came through Italy, claimed to want asylum from Tunisia, which was bizarre. In that Tunisia, nobody needs asylum from there. They're the only country that really moved towards democracy. But at the end of the day, we have a global problem that threatens the West, which is Salafi jihadism, and it's not just violence. And the current vetting process, yes, they vet them significantly, they interview them, but it's all about whether they belong to terror groups, whether they belong to any radical organizations that are perceived in the list of threats, if you will. And they're not vetting for ideology, and that ideology is Islamism, belief in certain ideas that may be anti-Semitic, anti-Western. So just as in the Cold War, we didn't only vet that they were violent Soviet sympathizers, we vetted whether they were communists. And this is the problem, is that I agree with Mr. Trump's thought process that we need to open up. Right now we're letting sort of everyone in, whether they share our values or not. And one of the reasons only 0.1% are Christians is you end up filling all of that with anyone who just doesn't happen to be a terrorist. So why not allow, the studies show 20 to 30% have some Islamist sympathies. Those people shouldn't come here. Now all of a sudden everything is so, America is so evil because it wants to put a pause, when in fact Saudi Arabia, other countries that might share some of the Islamist ideas of these 20% should be taking in some of those. Why are we the bad guys? Because we want to put a pause until we start vetting against Islamist jihadist sympathies.
Isn't it amazing that you don't hear an outcry about these countries that do nothing to take in refugees? You mentioned Saudi Arabia. I mean, they get a pass. We all know the history of 9/11. And now when you have the crisis and Saudi Arabia has the opportunity to take in people, they do nothing, as well as, the Emirates. I don't understand selective anger. If you're going to be honest about it, then stand up against those who don't stand with you. We claim that Saudis are our friends, and yet when you look at the history, I don't think friendship is one of their priorities.
Yeah, I mean, and when you look at the 7 countries they listed, I don't understand why Saudi Arabia and Qatar weren't included. If you look at who the founding fathers of ISIS were, those countries that funded and fueled based on their own Wahhabi Islamist ideology, I think people coming from those countries now, the administration may tell you, well, their security apparatus is a little more reliable and et cetera. But bottom line is if you really are pausing to start vetting against ideology, then those countries should be included. Unfortunately, you're exactly right. Why is it such a crime that the United States, and the numbers are what's just been so bizarre, is that Obama we only brought in something like 15,000 in the last year, and they were supposed to move it up to 100,000, and President Trump is cutting that in half. I mean, the numbers, total immigrants brought in have been somewhere around 100,000, let alone those simply from Syria, which have been 10 to 15. So the exaggerated response, I will tell you, one of the implementation things has been horrible, which is why all of a sudden you need a federal judge to stop what's happening. Did the employees of Homeland Security and the border and airports not really understand what this executive order meant, and that people that have green cards and other things now are fearful and of being sent back? That there's something that just went awry in signing an order that he should have known, or the administration should have known, not be implemented correctly.
Yeah. How do we get stronger alliances? I mean, it seems we're fighting for the same things. It seems that, of course we want safety here. Of course we don't want people who are going to be identified simply based on religion. We understand that. But yet, we all go into these different enclaves and we don't stand together enough. We should be standing with you. How do we strengthen that coalition? I talked to Christian leaders as well. And by the way, let me just mention this. Christians have been persecuted over the years. I didn't hear this outcry. If anything, there was, this deafening silence. And yet you were talking about it. We were talking about it. And we don't see the numbers we need to see in terms of support.
Well, because the mantra, the discussion in America seems to always focus on how you can use an issue to wedge and use it for partisan one-upsmanship from left versus right. And both sides end up in an extreme fashion using and exploiting issues for partisan divide and for partisan victories in messaging. And unfortunately, this is a no-brainer. America was founded on fighting theocracy. If you are, right now they're saying, the executive order claims favoritism for Christians. That's complete nonsense. David French wrote a great piece yesterday in National Review. He said, listen, he was no great Trump supporter. He was actually, they thought he might run in the late election as an independent candidate. But basically he said, listen, the word Muslim is not in this thing. It talks about those who are persecuted for their religion. So if you're going to protect those minorities that are persecuted for their religion, they should be at the head of the line. That's very American. We have Commission on Religious Freedom. We look at religious persecution. So you can't say we're going to protect minorities and give them haven if they're not only political but religious persecution, and then say if you bring them to the head of the line, then that somehow violates religious freedom. That's just the most Orwellian definition of favoritism of religion you could have.
Yeah. All right, talk about your organization, how people can find out more about it so they can participate.
Our website is aifdemocracy.org, and our Muslim reform movement is growing. We have a coalition of reformist groups in the U.S., Canada, and Europe. And I have a new website that's rolling out in February. I'll toggle. It's called takebackislam.com, which is going to be a newsletter for folks that want to follow what I do and what is new in our activism.
I got to tell you, some time ago, when you began speaking around the country, I remember mentioning you to people I knew who were Muslim. I said, you got to hear Zuhdi Jasser. You got to hear what he has to say. And they said, no, he doesn't represent it. I said, tell me what it is he doesn't represent of your thinking. And I think they were resentful, and you've heard this. They're resentful because you were outspoken, because you were out there talking about deficiencies within your own community. And I know, as a Jew, it's very, very difficult to point a finger at our own. But it's necessary. If you're going to solve the problem, then you've got to address the problem, even if it impacts members of your own people. And you're not afraid to do that. And yet others, I think they feel if you're more if you're quiet, reserved, somehow it's either going to go away or people won't know about it. That doesn't happen. History has proven that's not the case.
Yeah, I mean, it's so important to treat our family, our Muslim communities with tough love. I just finished a debate with the Muslim Public Affairs Council that we posted online at AIFD TV. This is a group that has been the primary Muslim group in the era of the Obama administration, and they were going to post it. They decided not to afterwards because they realized that all of the propaganda they spread about what I'm doing when we debated one-on-one is not there. It's just false. And Muslims in the audience, many came up to me and said, boy, they seem to have misrepresented what you stood for. You really stand for values we love. I just wish you wouldn't say it publicly. And I said, well, if you really want bigotry against Muslims to melt, join us, and Americans will see us be real, genuine, and beginning that 12-step program we need to have.
You know, they're not bothered if you say it about other people. It's only when you say it about your own. You know, scream it about others, but be silent when it comes to your own. I had the opportunity of going to the International Holocaust Commemoration at the UN, and I was very encouraged by the new Secretary General, Guterres. I don't know if you had a chance to meet him. He's from Portugal, but at least he stood up and he spoke about what happened in Portugal over the years, the anti-Semitism in Portugal. I said, how refreshing to have an SG who publicly denounces what happened in his country. Now, if more people would do that, we'd be in a much better place. But, you know, once again, I'll denounce what happens in your country, but when it's my own people, I got to be silent. And
it's just that.
Zudi Jasser, doctor. Yeah, do you want to say something? I'm sorry.
Oh no, it's just the hypocrisy is unbelievable, and that's why people say they haven't heard a voice of moderation, is because Americans get it. When they don't hear Muslims frank and honest, they say there's something missing. Where's that voice? So thank you.
And then when they hear it from you, they say, well, you know, he doesn't really stand for. He's only a lone voice. It's, no, he's not a lone voice. There are people who stand with him. We stand with him. So let's keep doing what you're doing, and as you know, we will always be with you. Dr. M. Zudi Jasser, President, founder of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, co-founder of the Muslim Reform Movement, former vice chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. You want to read a great book? Read Dr. Jasser's book, A Battle for the Soul of Islam, an American Muslim patriot's fight to save his faith. You served in the armed forces, didn't you, Doctor?
Yes, sir. 11 years in the U.S. Navy.
All right. Thank you for your service, and thank you for all that you're doing.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Be well.
God bless.
Religion on the line.